Okay, so I'm going to do just a quick welcome to everybody, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues who's going to do the introductions, and then we'll get to the main event for today. But let me start by saying, first of all, thank you everybody for coming and for being here. I even see people here from the village of Livingston, New Jersey, so welcome. And Long Island, and of course Brooklyn and Manhattan, so welcome everybody. My name is Dima Galaborodsky, and I represent Jewish Parents Academy, and we are one of the main sponsors of today's event, so it's really great to see many of our current cohort members and alums here. So welcome again, welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk about Jewish priorities, and I'm not gonna say more than that, but I think today Jewish priorities are on top of all of our minds for many obvious reasons. So again, today's event is really made possible because of all the sponsors and all of you here in the room. So I want to say a special thank you to David Hazony and the Z3 Project. David, thank you. Thank you for really making this happen and schlepping to Brooklyn to talk to us. I want to say thank you to the Manhattan Beach Jewish Center. So you just heard from the Rebbe of Manhattan Beach Jewish Center. This is where we are. This is the beautiful shul of Manhattan Beach Jewish Center. Has a very special history. So again, thank you to MBJC. Thank you to the Shtiebel. This is another synagogue just down the street. Thank you to the members of the Shtiebel. Thank you to Ay Mishpacha. I think I saw the president of Ay Mishpacha walking in just a minute ago. I think he's somewhere here. But thank you to Ay Mishpacha for being here. Thank you to Kings Bay Y, Mark's JCH, the Sephardic Synagogue, and the Shorefront Y. Those are all the sponsors of today's event. So on that note, I'm going to actually pass it on to the Executive Director of Jewish Parent Academy, Elena Pogorelsky, and she's gonna lead us with the intro and get us to tonight's event.
Thank you for the applause. That was special. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I also want to second Dimitri in thanking all of the co-sponsors and trying to publicize this event and bring as many people to this room to be in the presence of these great minds who we're honored to have with us today. Thank you, David, for making this happen. Can't say that enough. This is actually our second event with David Hazony in the last few months. The original event was planned in the days before October 7th attack. When I found out that this book was written and is about to be published, and that the editor is doing a round of presentations across North America, I reached out, literally cold, reached out and said, you know what, we have amazing involved Russian-speaking community. We have a platform for you. And David immediately reached back, and we've been in conversation ever since. And it was really poignant when, in the wake of October 7th, it wasn't clear whether all the publication events are going to go on. And I think what became eminently clear is that there's nothing more important right now than the conversation about Jewish future and Jewish priorities. And this book became a catalyst and a blueprint for those conversations. It also is daily making me jealous of David's work, because I think it was all a very smart ploy to not only put together really significant work that really represents the voices and captures the Jewish voices of year 2023. This is even judicial reform when it was written, but he gets to travel and co-host meetings with the most brilliant people across the country and really across the world. So I'm really envious of you having to do that, and I really appreciate that you included us in your community of learners, and that you're here with us today. So let me make a brief introduction, and I want you to spend as much time as possible with the brilliant authors and thinkers that we have in the room with us today. So I'll start with David Hazony, because he's the editor of the book. He's an award-winning editor, translator, and author, a Steinhardt Senior Fellow at the Z3 Project. His newest work, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People, published by Wicked Sun in 2023, brings together a remarkable array of new essays from across Jewish world. His book, The Ten Commandments, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. He has PhD in Jewish philosophy from the Hebrew University and lives in Jerusalem. So thank you for being in this part of the world today. Also with us today, we have brilliant Dr. Ruth Weiss, who is a professor emerita of Yiddish and comparative literature at Harvard University and a fellow at the Tikva Fund. Her latest book is Free as a Jew, which you may have seen outside, a personal memoir of national self-liberation. We highly encourage you to get it and read it. Also with us, we have another David Bernstein, and I have to share that I've known about David Bernstein for a few months before I knew that we'll have a chance to have him in the room with us, because one of our other preeminent speakers, Isabella Toporowski, who knows our audience and our interests, said this is the person who you have to bring to speak to your audience, and here we are. So I'm extra excited that this is happening today. David is the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and the author of Woe Antisemitism, How Progressive Ideology Harms Jews, which is one of the most timely books on the market today, and we also have it outside if you're interested in purchasing one. So with that, I'll hand over the microphone to David Hazony, who will moderate this conversation. And after we are done here, we'll have a brief book signing session outside of this room. So if you have a book or want to get a copy of the book, you'll be able to get it signed by the authors and contributors and the editor of this book. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Everything okay? In the back? It is just wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Lena, and Dimitri spoke, and the rabbi, for Akiva, and really, it's every step along the way is one in which I both get to share what we've achieved and what we're thinking about, but I also get to learn a tremendous amount. Before I speak a few minutes about the project itself, and then I'll turn to our esteemed panelists. We didn't know that there would be October 7th when we started this book. The project started a few years ago, probably 2021. When Adam Bellow, who is the publisher of Wicked Sun Books, I don't know if you noticed that all three books were published by Wicked Sun, the brilliant son of a Nobel Prize winning novelist, Saul Bellow, excuse me, who approached me with the idea of an anthology. And he said, anthologies can be really important. I had no idea what he was talking about, and he said, no, listen, if you pick the right niche and do it at a high level, it can become kind of a snapshot of a generation, and something that people really feel they need to have. It just depends what your niche is. And, well, I kind of look back on my life, and I've been a liberal and a conservative, an Orthodox Jew and a secular Jew, an Israeli and an American. And I said, without batting an eye, I said, how about the entire Jewish people? And he laughed, like you laughed. And I laughed. And then we started thinking about it and started imagining and realizing there didn't exist any single forum in which the Jewish people as a totality could get together and disagree about our collective future. So we sort of imagined it as kind of, a Thanksgiving dinner where you come, the whole family's there, including that cousin that you despise, is there, and you're there because it's a family, and that's what families do, is they sit around the same table, even if their ideas are completely counter to each other and even negate each other. but they're still there. I think it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe who said that there's also, about the Seder table, right, there's the wicked son. We know about the 4 sons. But there's also a 5th son. That's the one who isn't at the table at all. Okay? So we wanted to try to keep everybody at the table in a single book. That was the kind of the vision. A funny side story, it's true. The book was done before judicial reform. And we spent 9 months of 2023 worried that the book would feel like it's out of date. And then October 7th happened, and judicial reform disappeared. And all of a sudden, the book felt much more current than it would have if we had had all this discussion of judicial reform. I experienced October 7th like an Israeli. I live in Jerusalem. I have children growing up in Jerusalem of different ages. I had 2 in the army before October 7th. By October 8th, I had 5 in the army, some in combat units. And that was the first shock. The second shock was to start to find out how many people I knew or I knew of 1 degree of separation who had either been killed or taken captive, whether it was my son's best friend or a very close friend of mine, her son's best friend, or my first cousin whose ex-girlfriend of 14 years was taken captive and is still a hostage today. That was the experience that we felt. And for the first 3 or 4 days in Israel, it was utter, absolute panic because we didn't know where the terrorists were. We didn't know how far they'd gotten. We didn't want to leave our homes. We couldn't send our kids to school. After 3 or 4 days, once we knew they were out of our borders, the entire country shifted completely into war mode. War is something we know. Okay, we know what it means to call up hundreds of thousands of reserves, tremendous mobilization militarily, and tremendous mobilization on the civilian front. And we were united as a country as never before. But we were also deeply traumatized. And one thing that happens when you're very deeply traumatized is you try to focus on the most practical things. Because even very deeply traumatized people still have kids to get dressed in the morning and to wash at night and to, buy food and to do the very practical things. And sometimes that's one of the best ways to just handle the situation. And for me, I had to figure out whether my book was going to launch or not. And as Leah pointed out, I didn't expect it, but I started to get calls from the Weizmann Museum in Philadelphia, where we had planned a full day event with 30 speakers, and they called me up and they said, we want to do it anyway. And the Stryker Center on the Upper East Side, where we had a 9-speaker event planned, and they said, we want to do it anyway. And the Z3 conference out in Palo Alto, California, they said, we want to do it anyway. And what I discovered was that not only was this book launch not going to be canceled, but that suddenly there was a powerful, urgent need among many American Jews to come together. But it wasn't just about coming together. The book's urgency grew also because, and I'm going to put this in a not so gentle way. Everybody knows that the Israeli security machine fell asleep at the wheel. Everybody knows there was a massive, unprecedented intelligence failure that allowed October 7th to happen. What not enough people understand is that the diaspora also fell asleep at the wheel. That institutions that had spent 100 years being called defense institutions, right? Defense organizations that were meant to protect Jews from anti-Semitism had completely failed to see the huge waves of anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas, and I have some even stronger words than that, excitement, not just bloodlust, things that we had not seen for generations. And yes, American Jewry fell asleep at the wheel. And that means, and I think that Jews intuit it, intuitively they know it, but what it really means is that it's a time for rethinking. It's a time for asking hard questions. It's a time for reopening issues such as political affiliations and commitments, such as the fundamental cores of Jewish identity all across the community, such as what peoplehood really means, and maybe perhaps we really do belong together more than we belong with our allies on the outside. Many, many questions have been raised and not yet answered. And this is an urgent thing because my fear, my biggest fear, is that a few more months will go by, and frankly, the Gaza war will end. I personally believe it will end with the complete destruction of Hamas as a governing or fighting force within the Gaza Strip, at least. But the war against the Jews that has been launched globally isn't going anywhere. And the question is whether global Jewry is prepared for it. So when I came to America and I saw a lot of people talking about loneliness and fear, which is something different from what Israelis were experiencing, and I saw mobilization for Israel. And it's a wonderful, amazing, incredible thing that Jews came together to help Israel. But Israel is a government with an annual budget of $140 billion. Whereas the diaspora was under attack. And so I wrote an essay that was apparently quite provocative called The War Against the Jews, where I made several claims, but the core claim was the diaspora needs to move into a kind of a war mode, a war footing, to start thinking like generals, to start thinking about taking fight to the enemy. And I actually brought a whole list of what it looks like. But the most important thing, and this will be my final point for now, the most important thing I think I said in that essay was that we have to fight the long-term battles and not just the short-term ones. We have to understand that the battle of ideas is one that we have been losing for generations. That every single slogan, this is where Isabella Tabarowski's spirit hovers over this entire event, every single slogan that you hear in demonstrations in campuses or in Times Square or Grand Central Station or wherever, every single slogan originates in books that were written in Moscow, that were written in Paris, that were written in Morningside Heights. And we have fallen asleep at the wheel. We've been trying to, we've been saying the house is burning down, we can't invest in ideas and intellectuals and books. And the problem is that a war that was launched with books cannot be defeated, cannot be won with billboards alone. You have to invest in ideas. So this book is aimed at sort of striking a match that'll help create and engender a conversation about books and ideas. My involvement with the Z3 Project, which is just this amazing organization that most people on the East Coast haven't heard of, but they're based in Palo Alto. They have an annual conference called the Z3 Conference, where they talk about Zionism and how to spread Zionism across North America. And they've asked me to help start a think tank there, which we're going to have more news about hopefully in the next few weeks. And so I agreed, but I'm not relocating to Palo Alto. And it's really, I think, a moment where we can also be a bit optimistic. Those of us who have seen, those of us who for decades and generations have been seeing the enemy, and I think we should be allowed to call them enemies, right? It's a war. We've watched as the enemy built its forces intellectually, institutionally, hijacking one after another organization without fighting back. And perhaps this is a wake-up call. Perhaps this is a moment for the Jewish community as a whole to really deeply rethink how it's going to fight this war. So I'm really thrilled because I feel like I'm sitting with two of the greatest warriors for the Jewish people at the intellectual level that I can think of. And I want to first turn to Professor Ruth Weiss. And I'm going to quote your essay. Your essay is on moral confidence. And I want to, I hope that I really got the point right. This is what Ruth writes. Since then, this is after this opening discussion of a whole academic conference that she's involved in, the problem I identified has intensified to proportions I could not have foreseen. Remember, this is being written before October 7th. The growing ferocity of the political and ideological attack on Israel and Jews has induced a corresponding collapse of morale among those who are sensitive to accusation. Jews of strong, autonomous faith in Jewish values can withstand hostility to the point of death, but those without such commitment can fold like an accordion, one that is playing the enemy's anthem. This passage really struck me, and I hope I understood it properly. But there is a desperate need for Jews to, for the lack of a better term, and I'm not as articulate as you, but to find a spine, to become the people who are inoculated against the accusations, to let it slide over them, and to stand tall and proud, and not. If I understand what you're saying correctly, the implication is, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that in some way the Jewish need for approval from the outside causes an almost a hyperventilating reaction to the accusations that only fans the flames, that only makes things worse. And we don't benefit from it at all. Am I getting it right?
Well, thank you. And from my perspective of everybody being here, I'm not sure that, the project that you outlined is, I think you will all agree, is an important one. But I'm not sure that this audience, if I understand it correctly, is the audience for whom such a book was necessary. As I said, my husband and I lived for 21 years in Boston, and the best thing that happened to us was the arrival of Soviet Jews. And my husband was the only non-Soviet member of the Republican Jewish Coalition in Boston. So no, this is a fighting tribe, and I've been at war all my life, so I didn't need a wake-up call, and was very frustrated, as a matter of fact. I thought that the end of Israel had come during the Oslo so-called peace process. I thought that no country could survive such a stupid move, that no country had ever armed its enemy with the expectation of gaining security. And I did not see how people could survive such a mistake. Well, I was wrong, because Israel can survive many, many things, and it is stronger than one had ever imagined. But that strength, as you rightly say, is not reflected to the same degree in the United States. And as you, I'm sure, have noticed, I think that the emphasis has been a very bad one, a very poor one. The emphasis on Holocaust education has been fatal. I felt that from before the first Holocaust Museum was ever established, and tried to fight it in my community of Montreal at the time. Why? Because this was the story that we tell ourselves all the time. I mean, we still mourn the temples. We mourn, and we will mourn our dead. And we will do everything to try to keep their memories alive, and that's what I do professionally and so forth. But we do not bring that message to the United States of America. That's not what they should have learned about us. We should have said from the very start, look what happened to us in the 1940s. We performed the greatest miracle in human civilization. Our people in the same decade lost 1/3 of its people in the most humiliating, horrendous destruction that was ever conceived and executed. And in that same decade, we recovered our sovereignty in the land of Israel that had been under foreign occupation for 2,000 years. No people has ever come close to performing such a national miracle, and certainly not even the Jewish people. And so this is a story that is beyond inspiring, and every aspect of it is amazing. And that's a story that we should have been telling to the African Americans. You were slaves? Well, have we got a story to tell you about self-liberation? And so, you are, I don't speak to all of you as if you were all from the former Soviet Union, but what I mean is that when Soviet Jewry came, one didn't have to tell them that because they were themselves again reenacting that same kind of revitalization and so forth. So yes, we have lost a lot of time, and it's not something that one can easily regain. But I do think that, this is a free country. That is the truth about America. And there are more media possibilities than there ever were before. We write books, this is true. I think we're both given to writing books. But there are your children, and some of you are very savvy about using other methods of communication. And we know what it is that we have to tell. We have to tell about our strength. We have to tell about our vitality, but we have to tell why it is so important. And the one thing I will say, though, where I don't know, I don't think that we should withdraw into ourselves. I know how tempting it is at this point. We feel very lonely because around us are a lot of Americans who do not understand what we're feeling and do not understand where we are. Well, okay, but we dare not retire into just our synagogues, just our organizations. We have got to fight for America. The truth is, I think that we both would agree with this, that anti-Semitism and the war against the Jews, the jihad that's been brought into America itself, is only using the Jews as a vehicle to destroy this country. And I think that we are the fighting front line. And we've got to fight it not just for ourselves, we've got to feel that we fight it for America as well.
Thank you. And I think that I would even amplify that and say that I think that the rest of America is looking at the Jews to see how they'll respond. Okay, just like the rest of the Middle East is looking at Israel to see how it responds. Okay, when Israel defeats Hamas, it's going to have more friends in the Middle East than if it doesn't. And if the Jews fight back in America, that'll inspire the rest of America to fight back as well. So I think that we have an obligation and a role to play and an example to show. David, you wrote an essay also before October 7th, all of the essays were. It was very prescient, called Confront the New Cossacks. And you were talking about the left, the progressive left. David was, like Ruth and like many of the writers, one of the people who had been warning and had seen what was coming. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Cossacks? Who are the old Cossacks and who are the new Cossacks, and why did you use that term? And perhaps respond a little bit to what Ruth said about how this helps us understand the fight that's ahead of us and the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Let me first say what an honor it is to be on this panel with Ruth, whose scholarship I've been reading since I was an undergraduate in college. And just to show you the esteem that I hold you in your writing, I think I quoted you more extensively in my essay than anybody else. The other honor I have, by the way, is that Natan Sharansky wrote the foreword to my book. And so I quoted both of them because they both talked about communism. Sharansky, of course, understood early on in conversations I had with him the threat of this ideology that was catching on the left. And when I told him I was writing this book, I asked him, would he consider writing the foreword? And he thought of it as a busy guy, by the way, very busy guy. And he agreed to do it because he understood the danger this posed to America, not just to the American Jews, but to America. And so thankfully I've been so educated by others who have lived through communism, lived through totalitarianism. My mom is from Baghdad, Iraq, and lived through the horrors of the tumultuous Middle East, particularly in the 1960s and so forth. So I grew up with that too, just like many of you did and many of your kids have. Just a brief story. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I visited Columbus just this week, earlier this week, and gave 4 talks in 2 days. And one of the talks was with a Jewish day school senior class in Columbus. And I don't know, on a whim, I asked the kids in this class, I think there were like 25 of them, I asked the kids in this class, how many of your parents came from the former Soviet Union? And about 5 of the kids raised their hand. And it was interesting that those 5 kids were the most animated about what I was talking about, the most committed, the most knowledgeable of all the kids in the class, because they too had been brought up by parents like many of you who have told them the stories of how they lived in the former Soviet Union and what the real difference between totalitarianism and freedom, which we somehow lost sight of in so many of our societies, in Western societies. I've been on a bit of a speaking tour, as we are now, and I've had the chance to talk to a lot of American Jewish mainstream organizations and groups. And I'm here to report that the average American Jew is changing much more than I would have thought. I was speaking in Miami to one of these groups, I won't say the group, one of these mainstream Jewish groups, and the director of the office there was very nervous about me coming to speak. You know, I wrote a book, Woke Antisemitism, and apparently the W word is not used in polite society.
Was that before October 7th or after?
No, this is after October 7th. This is in December, right? This is just in December. And so he introduced me and he said, you're about to hear a controversial speaker who really is speaking about his ideas, but he's willing to listen to yours as well. It's okay, fine. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And he told me in advance that there was a woman on his executive committee that was there. She's a very high-powered partner of a law firm, and she's a progressive firebrand. And he was worried, you could tell he was worried how she was going to respond to me and my arguments. And I didn't hold back. I mean, I talked about my concerns and my concerns, my horrors about diversity, equity, inclusion programs that were sweeping the way in colleges and telling people to think in a very simplistic oppressed versus oppressor binary. And they're teaching this to our kids in K-12 education, in colleges, in corporations, and nonprofits. And I didn't hold back. I said what was on my mind. And we went around the table. It was a big, like one of these big law firm tables. And one after the other, people said, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. We get to this person, and you know, he's holding his breath, and I'm okay with it, you know. And she says, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know who I am. I understand what you're saying. I agree with it. I don't know where I fit in anymore. I've heard this so many times that I don't believe anymore it's a coincidence. I spoke at a Reform synagogue 3 weeks ago. And it was 2 miles from my house. And I got a call that Friday, it was a Friday night discussion, from the woman Reform rabbi at the synagogue, who says, I want to let you know that I was opposed to you coming and speaking. But October 7th this was set up way before October 7th. October 7th had a real impact on me. And I read your book, and I have to say that I'm in a very different place, and I'm so glad you're coming. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I spoke on Sunday night to Chabad at Ohio State University. 50 kids. It was wonderful seeing all these young people, 50 kids. They serve good food at Chabad, so that's one of the reasons. We're there, and they were amazing. I think that they shocked the rabbi, by the way. They were so amazing in the way that they interacted with me. And one young woman comes up to me at the very end, and she said, I came here because I saw the title of your book, and I came here because I thought you were some right-wing fanatic, and I was going to challenge you. But I realized I agreed with almost every single thing you said, and I've been struggling internally with all this as well. And thank you for helping give me the words to struggle with what I'm feeling and seeing. I will say, though, and I think David mentioned the mainstream Jewish organizations. I spent my career in mainstream Jewish advocacy organizations. I'm not a right-wing firebrand at all. I've been advocating for things like immigrant rights and criminal justice reform and same-sex marriage and the like my entire career. And it's not that I've changed my positions on those issues, but what I've seen among those organizations, many of which I've worked for, I've interned at, and the like, is that they are struggling to make this adjustment. They are having a hard time. They know that something has changed. And behind closed doors, they'll talk about this oppressor versus oppressed ideology that's giving rise to anti-Semitism on the left. They know it's true. They might call me a heretic, but then secretly agree with me behind the scenes. The problem is, as soon as they start thinking about changing, as soon as they struggle with the implications of that change, they imagine, well, if I take a stance that's critical of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the NAACP is not going to work with us anymore. They're going to think we're racist. And we're going to fundamentally lose our position and our progressive allies. And they convince themselves out of making the adjustment. And so to me, the challenge is going to be for people like you in this room, to start pushing back against these institutions. These institutions are listening to young Jews. They're listening to Jews of color. They're listening to an up-and-coming generation. What about Jews from the former Soviet Union who have experience with this ideology, know what it's about? Maybe it's time that you go to them and tell them, we demand that you hear our voice. Maybe it's time. Because you have something to teach the American Jewish community that they need to learn, and they need to learn now.
Thank you. So let's shift the focus from what we've been through and what we've learned to where we're going. Because my biggest fear, and I said this at the beginning, and I think you've expressed it as well, and perhaps Ruth, you may be the most pessimistic of us all. Perhaps, I'll find out, maybe not. It is so hard to imagine a fundamental change, even in the face of threats. Yes, it's true that there's nothing like a pogromist mob to sober the mind and focus the Jewish soul for a few minutes. But will there be change? What will American Jewish identity, what will Zionism in America look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Will it be different? Will we have learned lessons? So I want to ask that to both of you.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the future. I'm certainly not a pessimist by nature. I'm not very spiritually inclined. But I have to say that one day I was walking in Jerusalem, and it seemed to me that I could see it from God's point of view. I thought to myself that he must have needed the Jews to come back to this city. I just felt that momentarily. And to me, I'm just a small person living now, but the Jewish people is really eternal. And I believe that, and I believe it more than any truth. So, no, I'm not at all pessimistic in that respect. But here's how I come to see it. The most important history lesson I ever learned, and I think some of you might have as well, but at least I learned this in elementary school. I had a wonderful history teacher, and he taught us about the fall of the Second Temple and how Yochanan ben Zakkai was smuggled out of Jerusalem in a coffin, and how important it was that he set up then the yeshiva in Yavne. And why was it so important for the teacher? Because that marked the shift from sovereignty in the land of Israel to the way in which the Jewish people was able to adapt itself to live afterwards in the diaspora. So there was no temple, so that you had synagogue worship, and so that you didn't have the same kind of rulers, so that you now had rabbis and wealthy people and a kind of communities organizing themselves. And in fact, this was fantastically transformative, and that's one of the things that, you know, I tried to write about in another book, Jews and Power. But here's the thing that I have just come to feel in a strong way, and would try to persuade you of, that in 1948, the same thing happened in reverse. A change of that magnitude happened. We moved from living mostly in the diaspora to the centrality of the land of Israel. We now are a sovereign people with a homeland, and we have no experience with central government. Zero. And of course, I can't expect this audience to have much respect for government, because the government one has known is in a negative form. And you come to America now, and there's so much anti-government feeling. Oh, this country was built on slavery. Oh, this country was built against the Indians. Oh, instead of reading the Federalist Papers, which is the most astonishing book I read in my adult years, that built this country, instead of seeing what government is, there's a kind of a very anti-everything mood. I think our strongest need at this point as a people is to understand what it means to become a sovereign people with a homeland all over again, even if we're not the ones living in it. But it totally transforms what centrality is, how we have to start to think about governance, how difficult it is. Democracy is not biologically transmitted, and the Jews have always known what it means to transmit their heritage through very arduous education, right? Well, one has to really begin this process. I think that even after 75 years, we haven't really begun to understand the enormity of the change that took place when we are reconstructed as a people. And so it's all forward-looking, and it's all new, and it takes a new kind of thinking. And one, you know, it's not easy. We think about culture, we think in all kinds of other ways, music, culture. Those are our ways of expressing ourselves. I think it's time to start concentrating on thinking and reading about texts of war, how war is conducted, how governments are formed, what are the best forms, and for us too in America.
I was just going to say that there's probably no concept so alien to the diaspora Jewish soul as raison d'etat. Okay, the needs of what states require in order to survive. And it's kind of one of the fundamental things that has separated Israel and Israeli society from the diaspora. It's the understanding that Israel is built as a country that has to survive. And it has to do things to survive, including having an army, including fighting wars. And we don't have the luxury of occupying the ivory towers of various institutions and wagging our fingers at the ethics of Israeli leaders. David, what do you think about the future?
Yeah, I'm an optimist also by nature. I'm very optimistic about Israel, by the way. I hear so many American Jews who are so nervous and pessimistic. I was just reading about a young Israeli woman who was held hostage by Hamas who went back to her unit in the IDF. Imagine that for a second. How that compares to American youth. I mean, I have older teens myself, but how the difference between how Israelis have been raised and how so many American Jews have been raised and what that does to their sense of resilience. I think we have a lot to learn from Israeli society right now. So, Brett Stevens posed the following question: what is the October 8th Jew? What is October 8th Jew? And I've been thinking a lot about that and trying to define it for myself. What is the October 8th Jew? What is the October 8th Jewish community? What is the October 8th Jewish organization? And the one thing that struck me the most is looking at how other diaspora communities function and how different they can be than the American Jewish community. I was in Toronto not too long ago, and I was reminded of this, that the Jews of Canada do not have the same commitment to the ideological left that the American Jewish community does. In fact, no other diaspora community is joined at the hip with a political party. They tend to sort of be independent-minded in their politics because they know that they cannot find safe harbor in either political party. They know this, that's their experience. Yet American Jews have had a distinct experience, and it goes back, since the time of Roosevelt and then the Civil Rights era. And many American Jews were able to see that we had enemies on the right. It was very plain. First of all, the enemies on the right are very plain. They're brazen in their anti-Semitism. And we saw them as a fundamental threat to our well-being, the right, the political right. But Jews have always had a blind spot, particularly in America, for anti-Semitism on the left. As Ruth has argued before, many Jews remained a dominant force in the American Communist Party, even after Stalin had murdered millions of people. And I think we're going through that transition right now of understanding that we will not find safe harbor in either political party with any political figure, and that we have to develop the independent-mindedness as a community, which I think that is who we are. If there's any community that's supposed to stand outside of the political and social realm and advocate for a society based on certain principles, it's the Jewish community, and yet we've been enlisted into a specific political and ideological camp and see our own security as tied into that. And I think that is not serving this community well. It is not serving us well. Now, by the way, I know many of you might say, well, then of course we have to flock to the right. But how do you know that the right is not going to go in the same direction? How quickly, by the way, did the Republican Party start to see Putin differently? How quickly?
Israeli aid.
Yeah. I think we have to maintain that independent spirit that is, I think, central to our character, and start really, and as Leo Leibowitz said, start being the cool kid and throw our own party. In other words, I'm not going to pay the price of admission to anybody else's coalition. I'm not. Einat Wolf says Jews have been paying their pound of flesh to be accepted in various societies. I'm not going to pay my pound of flesh anymore. If you want me to be part of your party and we agree, I'll be there. I'll work with you. But if you're going to support Hamas, or you're going to support Putin, by the way, count me out. I don't need you. And I'll find my new friends. And by the way, we have new friends out there. There are Chinese Americans Thousands and thousands of Chinese Americans who don't want the country they fled to sound like the country they fled from. There are Indian and Hindu Americans who get us. There are black Americans who don't want their children to be taught that the system is rigged against them because they know what that will do to their children. Black Americans don't all buy into this ideology that's out there. 62% of black Americans, according to the Pew survey, oppose affirmative action in higher education. What does that tell you about their political diversity? Let's find those people. Let's start building our new alliances. As Ruth said, we cannot afford to turn inward. But in turning outward, we may need to rethink who our friends are.
I'm going to ask one short question to each of you, and then we can open it up. But first, I do want to apologize to Ruth for accusing her of pessimism. It was wrong. Brief answer. What is the one thing that gives you most hope?
It gives me the most hope. Well, in addition to this audience, what gives me the most hope is obviously what I do. Irena knows this. I've been fortunate for since I retired from Harvard, and even from before I retired from Harvard, there was an institution that was built, as it were, for my sake. Tikva came into being because some people saw the need for it, for education at a very high, intense level. A new kind of education, reading intensely the way Jews have been reading and studying forever, but doing it for our children and doing it so as to bring Jews and Western civilization into an intellectual conversation that has rarely been had, not one side and not the other side. So this is one of the things that Tikva has really begun to specialize in, that we really study both sides simultaneously and know how to read more intensely and so forth. So I think that if you are exposed to that, to a very high level, intense learning community, and you immerse yourself in it, there has to be something that you have that grows within you that is in a sense independent of the pressures of the hatred and the horrors that are coming thick and fast.
Yeah, I have to tell you that experience I had at Chabad at Ohio State a few days ago really made a deep impression on me. You know, I was waiting for the criticism, I was waiting for the pushback, and to see so many young people come up to me and want to talk to me after the program was over about their own sense of crisis. These are kids who love Israel, and they weren't about to give in to Israel. Now, I know we spend a lot of time trying to vault about this percentage of young Jews who go out there and they're anti-Zionists and they're, you know, this ceasefire crowd and all that. And yes, that's a problem. But I have to tell you, during that conversation at Chabad, the Rebbitzin stood up and said about these young people that were joining the anti-Zionist cause. She says, I think that they've written themselves out of the Jewish story. And she went on a tear about how we shouldn't even see them as part of the Jewish future anymore. And then her husband said, I disagree. And they had this beautiful argument in front of these college students about whether or not we should treat them as the wicked son or the fifth son that wasn't even at the table. And it was a beautiful discussion. Perfect discussion. I don't even have to have an opinion on it, by the way. I don't know what I think, but that gave me hope to see that and to see the young people just eat it up. Just eat it up. So we're never going to win over everybody. We never have, by the way. But to see that there's these young people that have spent time in Israel, most of them, who have a great love of the Jewish people and are ready to fight for it, that gives me hope.
Can I say what gives me hope? My kids and the younger generation of Israeli kids who are fighting the war, the tremendous spirit that I see in their eyes, the determination, the creativity, the hopefulness, the optimism, but something that's not grounded in abstractions or in illusions, something that understands exactly what we face, and still nonetheless gets up with tremendous spirit, something that nothing can stop that. Nothing can overcome that. There is no enemy that we will face that can overcome that people that my children are part of and that I see every day in Israel. So that gives me tremendous hope. And I want to thank Professor Ruth Weiss and David Bernstein, and thank you, Lena, and everyone else. I'd love to open it up to some questions. Everything is clear then, I see. Okay, let's start all the way in the back.
The question is, how do we define the enemy in the war? Who's the enemy? How do we define it? I have to tell you, I think the enemy is doing a very good job defining itself. David cited statistics yesterday at a talk we gave in northern Miami that 82% of Americans support Israel right now. 82%. Now, you would never know it by seeing these protests in Times Square or following Twitter or Instagram. 82%. Now, what are they seeing? They're probably seeing the same protests on campuses that you're seeing. They're seeing the blocking of an airport. They're seeing somebody rip down the American flag and put up a Palestinian flag. That's what they're seeing. And they're not liking what they see. Someone quipped, with enemies like this, who needs friends? And I think that they're defining themselves in the American mind. I didn't know where this was going to end up. And of course, I'm very worried about a younger generation who doesn't see things that way. There was some very disturbing results of the Harvard-Harris poll that showed that 50% or more of young people are siding with Hamas over Israel. That's disturbing. Where that will lead, I don't know. Whether that will have staying power over the generations, I don't know. But I have a lot of concerns about it. But if you look at the bigger picture, I think the enemies define themselves, and I think that most Americans here, thank God, don't like this radical force coming. It's sometimes called the Red-Green Alliance, the alliance between radical Islam and radical progressive politics. They don't like it, and I think all we have to do is constantly show them what these people are doing and saying, and we'll define the enemy quite well.
I don't know. I think that, first of all, the question is a very important one, because I think it's very important to keep your eye on the enemy. But I think that one of the things that we haven't done enough is to understand what your question really begins with. The Arab war against the Jews began in 1948 formally. It is the most lopsided war in history, and by now one of the longest. And it is the war that unites the entire Arab and Muslim countries, even those that have made peace agreements, how quickly they scramble back into the fold when they have to. That war is huge. It's immense. And if you look at the map, which we should always have before us and keep it there, you just look at the size of that war. I think that one of the reasons that we don't talk about it is because it's too scary to actually confront it. So I think that it's extremely important to know exactly what the size of that war is and how it metastasized and how it works on them. Just one little note. You see, the thing is that we're thinking about ourselves, but the truth is that if you look at what happened to Germany from the moment that anti-Semitism started in the 1870s to the coming of Hitler, you see how it destroyed Germany. And when you look at how anti-Semitism has worked in the Arab world since 1948, instead of improving itself, becoming crazier and crazier, until the pathology that you saw on October the 7th, you see that ultimately it destroys them. And I think that that's something that we have to understand, and as you say, we have to tell it to people to make them see it. Anti-Semitism is the most destructive force one can even imagine, but we see it destroying the Jews. We never make people see that the people it really destroys are the carriers of this disease, which is the people who wage war against the Jews.
Okay.
So I have a question. What troubles me a lot that several Jewish intellectuals, like Noam Chomsky, a lot of people say, who is not very bright, Grant Greenwald, who is a reporter, he's Jewish too. They take this kind of very anti-Israel, like anti-Semitic position, and I'm just curious, is that like phenomenon, like how do you guys explain this phenomenon? And it has been any historical precedent that you had some Jews who were going for Hitler, or you had some Jews who were like going for Russia, that kind of.
The question is, how do we explain the existence of the Noam Chomskys and the Norman Finkelsteins and all the, and is there a historical precedent to it, and is there an explanation for it?
That's a very good question. We've thought so much about it, but absolutely, I think that one wants to get out of harm's way in some sense. I think Jews have tried to explain away their situation through something larger and have tried to internationalize their situation. And that's one of the reasons. That's how Marxism actually may have started with Karl Marx himself, you know, wanting to transcend the Jewish situation so that you universalize it. And that universalization really turns against who? Against the Jew, who is the particular against whom you are universalizing. So this is a way of really, I mean, this has happened in Jewish history over and over again. In a way, you could say that you could go all the way back to Christianity, in a sense that Christianity also tried to distance itself from Judaism by transcending it, by universalizing it, and universalizing it from the particular. So it's a complicated question, but we're not going to escape the people who want to rise out of this and make us the enemy. And it's there. And as you are right to say that the main thing is to know how to confront it and not to be sucked in by it. And not to be, to go back to my essay in this, my worry is that one gets on the defensive. When you're attacked all the time, you are wrong, rotten. It's very, very hard to keep your moral confidence. Very hard for your kids, very hard for the community. One has to work at it. And as I say, not just we, but America too, because I think that America is under more assault by the Noam Chomskys than the Jewish people is.
I have a pet theory I'd like to share. That's a good ideological analysis. I have a psychological analysis, which is that there's a Jewish ego. Okay, like we're all really smart, and we take pride in being Jewish and smart, and that means when everybody's saying one thing, we're just going to do the opposite. We're just going to go the other way. And to be a Jew in that sense is like Noam Chomsky and Peter Beinart and all these people think they're the better Jew. Why? Because they're doing the opposite. Okay, to them that's the essence of being Jewish. And if you listen to them carefully and pin them down, they will say that they think that they're better Jews because they're going against even the most basic needs and health of our people. And it troubles me very deeply, but I think there really is some kind of a psychological game that's going on there as well. Do we have time for more questions? Okay. Maybe two more questions. Okay.
First of all, I salute you guys. As they say, oh, Captain, my Captain. You guys are great generals. Find ways when it seems like things are bleak. But in a positive note, I do agree that I notice personally also that there is a wave that we are, even though we're making such a small percent of the population, we are changing the mindset and the negativity against Israel and against Judaism through works like yours. What I would like to ask your advice about is something that I see and that hurts me to the core, and that is many young Jews who are in schools, and there may be someone who wants to speak for themselves over here, maybe not, who found that when they spoke about Israel and when they posted about the facts, they were attacked, marginalized, felt isolated, and many are afraid. So I have a lot of friends whose children are in medical school or medical school programs. You think, okay, that's a pretty high place already. People should be intellectual, should be open-minded, should have dialogues. And they're afraid. And they're educated, they know the facts. They're afraid to post because that one Israeli Jew who posted, because as Israelis we're, a little bit more, have more chutzpah, guts, know it better, posted about it. Now nobody wants to be their friends. And it's very, very difficult for them. And as strong as we think we are a social animal. We do need that interaction. So what do you suggest to that student who depends on the teachers for his grades, who, even though they don't think they depend on their social network friends, feels threatened if they would speak the truth? And if they don't speak the truth, then we're losing the war. So what do you suggest for them to do, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's hard, without a doubt. I have to tell you, when a lot of people in the Jewish community, people I'm friends with and I agree with and are Zionists, talk about the safety of Jews on campus, I wince a little bit. I'm worried that this idea of safetyism, that we're not safe if people march outside the Hillel. I mean, we might not be safe in some situations, but I want proud Jews. I want Jews who are capable of defending themselves. I want Jews who stand up. I don't want my kids, and I have kids that age, by the way. My kids are between 18 and 27. I want my kids to stand up for themselves and to be fighters. And I'm not going to pursue their safety. Of course, I might demand that they use law enforcement, the university use law enforcement when law enforcement is called for. But I think we've got to start raising strong Jews. Strong Jews who are willing to stand up for the Jewish people and themselves. First of all, weak Jews end up fostering more weakness. It doesn't help. Being weak doesn't give you security. Now, the more we can get people to be courageous, the more we can encourage young people to speak out, the more we can get people organizing themselves so that they're not alone when they speak out, the easier it will be. Every act of courage makes the next person have to be a little less courageous. Because you've already proved that you can speak out. And I understand what happened to the Israeli who spoke out, and everybody's looking at that. What we now need to do is go to those people, if we can organize them, and say, we need the next 10 of you. We need the next 10 of you to come out and speak. And put the challenge right to them. As Natan Sharansky said, no one in this country is going to disappear you for speaking out. You're not going to get thrown in the gulag. So it's the least they can do, and it's the least we can do.
I'm sorry, we have time for one more question.
I would just answer this, that just, it's important. Because for me, for example, I don't care. I don't depend on anybody. I'll have less patience, go to hell. You will come back anyway if you want good care. But on the other hand, those students, I've spoken to them really. I'm just like, I run with the Israeli flag on Coney Island, take pictures with a lot of people when they're running, and without a shirt just so they see a cuckoo guy kind of, and get attention. But that's me. I'm like you. I want to fight. But when we're talking about our, some kids, they're good kids, they're brave kids, but they depend on them. And even though you think you can go to medical school without having colleagues to go through anatomy class, etc., it's not that easy for them. I thought it is. And I thought, come on, you guys are smart, you know the stuff. Why don't you stand up? But it's very, very hard for them. And it's them that I'm worried about. I would go to every school like that and I would preach, and I would fight for them. But they need to do it.
Well, if it were easy, then they wouldn't be learning from it. And I think that it's important to be very upfront with them about the difficulty and the need to do it anyway, because this is reality that they're dealing with now. Last question.
Earlier you spoke about something that's very important, and David, you speak about something that's really fascinating to me, is where do we belong politically, right? And I've struggled with that, but I've heard, and I do a lot of reading from Dennis Prager, and he simply says that our enemy is the left. The Democrats, the liberals, the Republicans are not our enemy. The enemy is the left that we have in government, the people who are part of the squad, the people who are connected with the Super Bowl. That to me is a distinction that I think we have to discuss, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that, because a good Democrat, a good liberal, and a good Republican is with me, but an extreme leftist like we have in government is not.
Well, I think that what David has said is obviously true. You can't sign on forever. So the point is that one doesn't say, when you say, what are you? You can say, I am a Jew. I am an American. Your identity is not your political party. On the other hand, I think that to know which party is in favor of what you most consider important, that is really extraordinarily important, and you have to keep reading the newspapers as you do in order to decide that. I would say that, for example, Jewish women who vote on the basis of abortion are absurd. They may feel this deeply, as we do. We have opinions about it, but that should be how you place your vote. If you have Israel to worry about, and America to worry about, and bigger things to worry about, that's the kind of strategy that one always has to keep in mind.
Thank you. I totally agree. My mom sent me this video on YouTube from Candace Owens about a year and a half ago and said, isn't she amazing? And I thought, she's a little Meshuggah. What I found is, if someone can be a little Meshuggah in my favor, they can be a lot Meshuggah in my disfavor. And I have to say, look at her now, by the way, in her anti-Semitism, left and right. Tucker Carlson is great until he goes to Moscow and interviews Putin. And I'm just saying that, dogma begets ever more troubling forms of dogma. And I think we should find people who are rational, whether they're on the right or the left. And we should make friends who are rational, and we should not get this mindset. I disagree then with Dennis Prager. I have a lot of respect for him, but I disagree with him on that. Look, I wrote a book called Woke Anti-Semitism. So what did I do? I took the link on Amazon and I put it in every Facebook page, critical race theory, anti-critical race theory, anti-woke Facebook page I could find. In every single instance, somebody posted, sometimes more than one. You Jews invented wokeness in the first place, so stop complaining about it. And I'm reminded, and I see it on Twitter all the time, how prevalent the anti-Semitic sentiment is also on the right. And do I think it's the same threat to me right now? No, I don't. I think in some fundamental sense right now, this anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic sentiment we're seeing on the left is a greater threat to our disenfranchisement than anti-Semitism on the right. But look, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year in synagogue security, not because of Michigan anti-Semites on the left, but because of the right. Now it's both, by the way. So I think we have to understand that we have threats coming from both sides of the political spectrum. We need to be independently minded.
I want to thank everyone for coming. It's been a great evening. Thank you again, Jewish Parent Academy, V3 Project, and Shalom.